Okay. Show me.
What's up YouTube, Dr. C in the house. Thank you very much for tuning in for part, Part 7. Yeah, part 7 in the perfect quadcopter build series. So this is our perfect, well, soon to be perfect FPV quadcopter. In the previous video we flashed Betaflight onto our flight controller and did a first configuration of it. In this video we're gonna be installing a receiver, and in my case that's a Flysky receiver, and I'll be setting up a model in my radio set so that the inputs are what Betaflight expects of them. So this might be a bit of a, well, problem. This is a Flysky Paladin PL18 radio, and most of the people watching this video will not be using this here radio. Yeah, so your setup process of the model in your radio will be different. However, I'll keep this video as much as general as I can. Also, there are already a lot of videos on how to set up your receiver in Betaflight and such. So I'll keep this video as short as possible, but I'll basically show you what I do to set up my radio and the receiver for Betaflight use. So here we go. The first thing you definitely want to do is check if you have a manual for your receiver. Most receivers will come with a manual, or at least a diagram of what the pads do or what the pads are meant for. And let me see, if for instance you will be running an XM Plus receiver from FrSky, you'll only need to hook up plus or power and ground and one signal, your S-bus signal. In other cases, such as the XSR, you'll be hooking up an S-bus and a telemetry, or just an F-port connector or an F-port signal cable. In my case, in the case of this Flysky receiver, I'll be hooking up power plus and ground, that's the second one. Then iBus, which is basically technically the same as S-bus, and telemetry. So 4 strands is what I'll be using. This receiver can also do PPM, but well, I won't be using PPM. I suspect nobody else will, especially not in Betaflight with F7 flight controllers. So I'll be soldering up. This receiver came with a wire loom. So yeah, I'll be soldering up 4 strands to this receiver. And let me see, yeah, if you run an RXSR receiver, it'll come with a connector, a cable and a connector. So let me go and solder things up. There you go, there's my receiver with 4 wires or 4 strands soldered up to it. And as you might have noticed, I curl my wire up like this. And that's for 2 reasons actually. This will reduce interference between the signals, between the wires. And also that twisting will check, basically make sure that my solder connections are physically strong. You definitely want to give your solder connections a little bit of a torque. Not a honking torque, of course, but you definitely want to check if your solder connections are physically strong. So, with that said, we are now ready to hook up the receiver to our flight controller. Alright, so I've got the wire ends stripped. No more than 2 millimeters, maybe even a little less, tiny amount. And I'm gonna pre-tin those. I've got my iron set to 380 degrees Celsius, so this soldering will move along quickly. Yeah, nice. I like it when a plan comes together. If you got a good soldering iron and it's nice and warm and the tip is on good condition, this soldering job will move along super duper quickly, as you saw. Alright, let's bring the quad back into frame now. At this point I always make sure to have a diagram of my flight controller on screen, and you can't see it, but I've got it on screen over there, so that I can check back and forth. And I'm going to be using a plier, because yeah, your hands will be far too thick to place the wires well. Okay, so over here I've got my ground. I'm picking up the ground with the plier, placing it over the pad, and this should be a very quick, like so. And you should end up with a nice shiny bubble, soldering bubble, and your wire should be completely gone into that bubble. Alright, the next wire is my S-bus. I am actually using an alternate 5-volt pad here. So S-bus, I'm placing it on the pad. And day. Yeah, that looks great. Next one will be, this is my 5-volt over here, so I pick up the 5-volt strand, or the power strand. The power strand, I press it down on the pad, and presto, that's gorgeous. Yeah, and the last one will be for our telemetry, my TX2 transmit 2. So I'm going to be using UART 2 for my telemetry. We'll get to that in a second. Day. And that's the soldering. Now you go in and tug on all these wires a little, make sure they are physically well connected to the pads. And that's it. I can at least check if my receiver powers up. So I'll be using the LiPo I used to power my soldering iron to power the stack. Let's see. Yeah. I am not sure if you'll be able to see that LED over here on my receiver, but my receiver is alive. It's obviously not bound to anything yet, but yeah. So that's, yeah, let's bind up my receiver and see if that works. Alright, I've quickly set up a new model in my radio, and let me see, I'm gonna set that to, no, I'm first gonna power up my receiver. So this is always a little, well, a lot awkward to be pressing a button and hooking up a battery at the same time. Yeah, it would be very nice to have a switch in between the two. But somehow I'm always too lazy to make that, so. So my receiver is in bind mode, hopefully you can see that, and I'm gonna tell my transmitter to bind to it.
Binding. Bind successful.
Well, I'm pretty sure you could hear that, and my receiver has a solid green light indicating it is bound. Now, a second ago I was actually checking whether the switches would do anything, which is completely stupid because I haven't set up the receiver in Betaflight yet. Oh yeah, so this would never work. But yeah, okay, so that's what we'll be doing right now. Set up Betaflight to recognize our receiver. Alrighty guys, we are back in Betaflight as you can tell, and we are going to hook up the USB cable to our flight controller. At this point in time you don't need to hook up a LiPo to your quadcopter. We'll get to that in a second. Hi, cheeky day. COM15. From this you can tell that well, your computer has recognized your flight controller, and we can say connect. Cheeky day. Okie dokie, if this part of the video moves too quickly for you, I'd advise you to move back to my Betaflight installation and configuration video, the previous video in this series. Sometimes it can help you to re-watch something. Sometimes you simply need to hear something twice or three times for the thought process to click, to register, so to speak. Again, if this is a new thing to you, it's not for me. This is all bread and butter to me, Betaflight settings. But if it's new to you, you will probably benefit from seeing things twice or three times. So, okay, we need to move to the ports section, and remember that I hooked up this receiver to the S-Bus pad. And that's a pretty sure way of making sure your receiver will work if you have an S-Bus or, in my case, I-Bus receiver. Both will work the same. The S-Bus pad on this flight controller and on most will be on UART 1, right? So in the documentation of your flight controller it won't actually say UART 1, but that S-Bus pad is actually UART 1. So that's where my serial RX, my serial receiver is hooked up to. So I need to enable that over here, and it's actually enabled per default. That's the default setting. So that's what we need to fly the quadcopter. Then I do want telemetry, but that's not needed to fly your quadcopter. If again you are using for instance an FrSky XM Plus receiver, you won't have telemetry, and you don't need telemetry to fly your quadcopter. It's simply a nice added feature. So I've hooked up that telemetry strand of my receiver to UART 2, to T2, to transmit 2 of my flight controller. See, my flight controller is actually transmitting data back to my receiver, and my receiver will then send it back to my radio, and that's the telemetry part, right? And you can see that here I've configured UART 2 as a telemetry output, and again I have a Flysky receiver which uses I-Bus over here, so I've selected I-Bus for my telemetry. If you are using an FrSky RXSR, you can use FrSky over here. Right, so that's well, that's two options. I've actually checked if I have a quadcopter with an RXSR F-port setup, but I don't. Yeah, I'm basically moving all my quadcopters to Flysky, which, well, admittedly works a lot better, but this is not a review. Yeah, much faster and better range. Oh well. Again, serial RX on UART 1 will work for most any S-Bus or I-Bus receivers, and UART 2 telemetry is a nice extra. Okido. And if you've changed anything, you hit save and reboot. Then we need to go to the configuration tab. on which you have to specify what kind of receiver you actually have, and that's over here, receiver. We have a serial based receiver, which is true for most receivers these days. And over here you can see again iBus. I use a Flysky receiver. If you use a regular S-Bus receiver, you select S-Bus over here. And if you are using a one-strand F-port receiver from Flysky, you obviously need to select Flysky F-port over here. In that case, you wouldn't hook up your receiver to the S-Bus pad on your flight controller. You only need one strand to that T2, and that's it. That definitely is convenient and it works, but again, I don't have a quadcopter at this moment which has that set up, so I can't show you. Now the nice thing actually is, and this is a change from the previous Betaflight releases prior to 4.0. At this point I'd need to figure out whether my receiver is inverted or not. You might have heard of this. However, you don't need to anymore. Simply by selecting the iBus over here or S-Bus, you are set to go. So you don't need to go into the CLI window over here and change the serial RX, half duplex and inverted settings. Stock settings will work over here. And that's definitely very convenient. I was expecting to have to explain that to you, but at least with this F7 flight controller I have here, the Mamba F722S, with the firmware for that flight controller, I'm set to go by simply hooking up the ports and setting my receiver type over here. And again, I've checked. If you have an S-Bus receiver, that'll work as well. No need to go into CLI to change any inversion settings. That saves you a lot of trouble. Very, very nice. Okay, so basically that's it. If you've changed anything here, you need to save and reboot. And that's everything you need to set up in Betaflight. Well, no, wait a minute. Let's move our attention to the receiver tab. Now my transmitter is actually off, so I'll switch it on. Make sure I have the proper model loaded. Let's see, high five, yes. Okay, if I move the sticks, nothing happens, because at this point in time you do need to hook up a LiPo to your quadcopter. The receiver isn't powered from USB, regrettably. That would have been nice, Diatone. But, as you can tell, my receiver has come to life. Now, if these movements, so roll, pitch, yaw and throttle, don't correspond with your radio, you need to either change the channel order in your radio to match this. Aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, or change it over here to reflect the settings of your radio. You can simply, well, type in the letters over here or select one of the templates over here. And in my case, the default setting was correct, so that's very, very nice. Yeah, otherwise you might have to again change this channel order over here. After that, this order of the channels should reflect the order of in your radio. Okay, let's see. I've set up 3 switches. Flight mode over here on aux 1. Arm and beep, you can hear the beeper. And I've set up a flip over switch over here, which is actually aux 4 in my radio. My radio has some kind of flight mode on aux 3, which I never use. I could use it, I guess, but I never do. Oh well, in most radios you won't have that and you'd simply use aux 3 maybe for your flip over. Yeah, that's up to you basically. The things you really need is a flight mode, so I always have that on aux 1, a 3 position switch, and an arming and beeper, which I always have on the aux 2. Now you can see this bar on aux 10. My receiver actually transmits its RSSI on aux 10, so I've actually set that up over here. If you've selected the correct firmware for your receiver, and yeah, that's really a downside of the FrSky system, you need to select which firmware you want to use. However, for most receivers for FrSky, you can select a firmware which includes an RSSI on aux 12 in most cases. So if you are running an FrSky system, you probably need to select RSSI on aux 12 over here. Again, I have it on aux 10. Notice how stable my RSSI is, and if you have ever seen this bar hop around on FrSky, yeah. Oh well. Okay, so let me see. What you also notice is that all these bars for my roll, pitch and yaw move from 1000 to 2000, and they middle out at approximately 1500. I need to do a little bit of trimming on my roll, as you can tell. Yeah, okay. So that's definitely something you need to set up in your radio. Betaflight expects these 3 axes to run from, again, 1000 to 2000 and middle out at 1500. So if you leave the sticks alone, they should middle out at 1500, as you can see now. Again, that's something you need to configure in your radio, and you do that by setting the endpoints. You don't do that with the physical trims on the front of your radio. You change the endpoints first, so that your stick travel runs from 1000 to 2000, and then change your sub trim, again not with the physical trim button at the front of the radio, but the sub trim, you set it so that the middle position is 1500. And for your throttle, you definitely do need to set the range, but well, your throttle doesn't really have a middle position. Let me actually try to show you in OpenTX as well, as most people will probably use OpenTX, so that'll make the video a lot more informative probably. So here you see the screen of my Jumper T16, and this is for another quadcopter obviously, but it'll work exactly the same. And I go to the settings of my quadcopter. Here is the model setup. You are familiar with it. Then I page to, let me see, yeah, here are my inputs. So this over here defines the channel order, right? The channel order you saw a minute ago. You can change this order to reflect the things Betaflight expects. 2 pages further, you see the outputs, and in this screen you set up the endpoints. You can see that I have actually changed the endpoints to 97.7 on the left and 97.8 on the right. Right, and I've added a little bit of sub trim over here. And that's basically it. So again, you definitely don't want to use these trim buttons to make things work, make that setup work in Betaflight. You use this screen to, it might be different in your radio. In my Flysky radio it's definitely different, but all radios will have endpoint settings and a sub trim. All radios I've come across have endpoint settings and a sub trim. So that's how you make sure that the travel of your sticks corresponds to a travel in Betaflight from 1000 to 2000 and have a middle position like so of 1500. You do that in this screen with the endpoints and the sub trim. Alright, and that is it for this video. As you can tell, I haven't stuck my receiver down to the on top of the flight controller. I've got some double-sided tape on it over here, as you can tell, but I do still need access to the solder pads for my VTX and the camera, and that'll actually be in the next video. In the next video we'll hook up a camera and the VTX. So that'll be coming up in the next video. I hope this was informative. If you are left with questions, however, leave me a comment down below. I'll be happy to answer you. Maybe other people can help you out. So don't hesitate. And again, next video will be on our FPV setup coming up shortly. Catch you on the next video. Bye bye.